Hello, and welcome to Shaping a Progressive Federal Judiciary. This is a Raben Group virtual policy discussion with our special guest, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat of Rhode Island, who is chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on the Federal Courts. I am Jeremy Paris, a principal at the Raben Group, which is a national public affairs and communications firm committed to making connections, solving complex problems, and inspiring change across the corporate, nonprofit, foundation, and government sectors. I head up the Raben Group's office right here in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm also the executive director of the Committee for a Fair Judiciary, which is a nonprofit organization that fights to confirm diverse and progressive judges to the federal bench. Our discussion today could not be more timely. With a Democratic majority in the U.S. Senate, the Biden-Harris administration has an opportunity to turn the tide against Republicans' decades-long effort to pack the federal bench with right-wing judges. How can the White House, how can Democrats in the Senate, activists and allies best work together to overcome right-wing control of the judicial nominations process and build a diverse bench which understands the impact of courts on individual rights, democracy, and economic justice? In just a minute, we're going to bring on Senator Whitehouse. I just wanted to say to everybody, welcome, and please participate. We'll be putting comments in chat. We are going to get to questions later on in the broadcast, but we'll see them as they come in. So please do participate. We want to hear from you as well. So I'm so delighted to welcome our guest today. Nobody is better positioned to help us answer these questions and so many more than Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Senator Whitehouse has been a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee since 2007. I remember it well. I was a staffer on the committee, and we took the Democrats took a majority that came along with Senator Whitehouse. He's been a strong voice for the integrity and independence of the courts and for accountability and transparency on the courts. And Senator Whitehouse may be surprised about it. He has been on the committee now for the confirmation of 5 Supreme Court justices, hundreds of federal judges, even though 2007 feels like yesterday. Last year, he and the Senate Democratic Policy and Communications Committee released a series of reports documenting how Republicans and their special interest backers have packed the courts with extremist right-wing judges to live reliably for their partisan political interests, and has talked about the impact of that court capture. So just yesterday, Senator Whitehouse chaired the first hearing of his subcommittee examining what's wrong with the Supreme Court, the big money assault on our judiciary. And so please, Senator Whitehouse, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Very good to be with you, Jeremy. Remember fondly our days together in Judiciary Committee.
Well, I was going to start with a serious question, but I feel like I want to start with a full confession, if that's okay, Senator. When you first joined the committee in 2007, we were doing the U.S. attorney firing investigations, and I was the staffer in charge, and I put out the APB when we got a big document dump. I was organizing, trying to find the right documents for a hearing upcoming, and you showed up. You were too new to know this was an evening. You showed up. You were a lawyer. You were a prosecutor. You were into it. You started pulling documents from my file you're like, this is great. Can you believe this? Oh, we've got to close this portal. All the stuff you've been fighting for years. I got so nervous about my document organization. I sent a staffer out to make a whole different set of documents, same documents, copies to give to you, just so that my filing system would not get screwed up. So I feel like I've been living with this burden for a long time. I just wanted to, do you have a reaction to that?
That was a great moment. And the other story that I remember there is how readily the media lapped up the Bush administration pushback that these are all political appointees, nothing to see here, folks, move along, move along. And it was only the McClarty group, that organization, that just stuck with it. And pretty soon the tide turned, the Republican attorneys general started coming forward, and the end of the day, it cost a very rotten attorney general, Gonzalez, his job. Even Bush couldn't tolerate him any longer, his old friend from Texas. So he got given the heave-ho. So it was a big, big event in the history of the Department of Justice, but it came perilously close to just being zipped over.
You couldn't be more right. And there's always a fight to get through sort of the echo chamber and to get your narrative through. And I got to tell you, one of the reasons I'm bringing up those old days, I was then a staffer for Chairman Leahy, is you arrived with a new Democratic majority and a Republican president. Obviously, we were doing oversight. You've now been on the committee for every configuration, as a majority with the Democratic president and Republican presidents, as a minority with both. What have you learned about the process now that we're turning to the federal courts? And right now, any day now, we can expect President Biden's first judicial nominations to come to the Senate, maybe even as soon as next week. What have you learned from these sort of years on each side of it about how we approach the courts, the fight over the courts, and the judicial nominations process?
Well, the thing I've learned is that when Republicans are in a position to nominate judges to the court and have a Republican Senate to provide confirmation, then all barriers fall.
Mm-hmm.
The judges no longer need to be qualified. The fact that they've done improper things in the past gets completely overlooked. The traditions of the committee that sought to pace and document production and stuff like that all get completely run over. There is nothing that will stand in the way of the Republican effort to confirm judges at the appellate level particularly. And when you look at behavior like that, you're a fool if you don't look for motive. People don't reverse their positions and make themselves hypocrites. People don't break long-standing rules and traditions of the entity they serve. People don't give up their own blue slips on circuit court nominees unless something very big is happening around them that is forcing that behavior. And so it's always really important when you see this behavior happening to look for the cause.
Mm-hmm.
And what we have not been as good at as we should have as Democrats is to train our sights and ultimately our fire on the cause. We'll complain about what happened, but there is signal in all of that. And the signal is of a force that is making it all happen. And we have frankly sucked at outing that force.
So I'm going to circle back in a minute. I want to hear more about motive and force and talk about your hearing yesterday, which was quite compelling. I watched the whole thing, and as we were talking about right before we got on camera, I think the fact that so many Republicans, they all showed up armed to bear with their own charts. I mean, it tells you as you were making the case for court capture, it tells you that you struck a nerve, right? When they show up, and you must have felt that must have felt like we're onto something here.
Yeah, every time I touch this, it goes off on the Wall Street Journal editorial page, in the Washington Examiner and the other right-wing media outlets, across the blogosphere. This hearing was something new in that for the first time, they ran a six-figure buy advertisement against me as a result of all of this on the TV. And of course, they did it in the D.C. metropolitan area, not in my home state.
Yeah.
So yeah, fire away, pal. See if that helps.
Yeah, they have about as good of a chance to unseat in D.C. maybe as Rhode Island. So
it's
good
my
luck.
new argument for making D.C. a state. As long as you're going to advertise there.
Well, I couldn't be more for that. Let's go with D.C. So we need to talk about democracy in the courts. I did want to not lose one thread in terms of the Republican treatment. You mentioned blue slips and jamming through appellate court nominees, and we saw 230. We're on the other side now, 230 nominees, lower court nominees through. Are you committed, and the Democrats committed to sort of holding to that same standard? I mean, I know we're not going to have blue slips anymore on circuit court nominees.
We're not going to have Republican blue slips on circuit court nominees. Let's say that. They've waived their right to that. But I'm unwilling to say when my First Circuit seat opens up that Rhode Island shouldn't have a voice in it this time. Mm-hmm. I didn't waive it. I didn't give it away. I'm not at all willing to accept that my blue slip for my circuit is gone.
Well, I remember you saying that. Actually, you made that point quite a few times in the fight over the blue slips when it was before committee. You said, look, you're going to want to say over whether this judge is in your state or it could be from anywhere.
We're sending Chuck Schumer's favorite friends from Brooklyn down to be judges on the Fifth Circuit in Texas. Cruz is going to have second thoughts about the wisdom of giving up his blue slip.
I love the point that I still love it. And maybe it's time. I hesitate to sort of go to this point, but as I understand it, the plan is to still maintain blue slips on district court nominees, which are the federal trial court nominees. And blue slips, we get into Senate East. This is the practice where home state senators get to sort of approve of a nominee from their state, and if they don't, that nominee doesn't move forward. It is supposed to promote consultation. Is that still the process? And the second part, I'll jump ahead of the question, is
to a point, yes.
Yeah. Is there a threshold there of like, okay, we're just never, they're blocking every nominee from Texas, or?
Yes. If it looks like out and out obstruction and blockade, then we'll reserve our rights to do whatever is necessary. Obviously, it'll take every member of the committee to approve the judge who is not blue slipped by their home state person. So we have to have everybody on board, and then we got to be able to confirm them on the Senate floor. So that means we got to have the caucus on board. So there's a conversation still to be had. But that was more or less the Republican posture, which is we're going to protect district courts, but if you're unreasonable, don't hold us to it.
Right. I served on the committee when we were confirming, we had the Democratic majority, were confirming President Bush's judges in a number of states and trying to work for consensus nominees. It does feel like, the practice has changed so much that we have only a couple of years. We're on the other side of 230, mostly white men, right? Almost uniformly white men, right-wing conservatives confirmed to the court. Like, we have this project ahead of us. So I'm hoping, I think of it, Senator, because I had the unenviable job of helping sort of get a quorum. I think of it as the prose, PROSC part of the job, not the poetry where you got to show up every week and have hearings. I know you're ready to do your part. You think the committee's ready?
Yeah, I think Dick Durbin as chairman is quite determined to make sure that we fill seats as rapidly as they open. And we're hoping that where there aren't immediate vacancies, judges on the circuit court might think about going to senior status, or even district court judges going to senior status, so that it opens a vacancy, and at the same time they can continue to serve as judges. But so we could have a pretty good crop of seats to fill.
Well, right now, I mean, there are, thanks in large measure to the thing you just identified of judges taking some senior status. It looked like there were very few vacancies. There are now about 70 vacancies. I think 10, my numbers are a little off, about 10 on circuit courts right now. And I think we're hopeful to see the first wave of nominees. So White House counsel Dana Remus sent a letter to Democratic senators during the transition, urging them to identify judges who, quote, reflect the best of America and who look like America, identifying both demographic diversity and the diversity of legal background as important pieces of rebuilding the judiciary on sort of district courts and circuit courts. Now, of course, we're two white men talking about this, but it's just so central for people that are invested in the courts and fighting for the courts to sort of focus on diversity, what it means for the law and diversity. Can you talk a little bit about how important this is to you, and maybe a reflection on what do you do in your state when you are identifying and recommending nominees to make sure that they also represent sort of the broad spectrum of America on the bench?
Well, the baseline is to find somebody who is respected and loved, frankly, really, in the legal community. And off of that baseline, you then try to make sure that you are as wide in your aperture as possible. So our last three appointments were the first African-American woman ever appointed to the First Circuit Court of Appeals, Rosary Thompson, who has done a terrific job and was serving as a trial judge in Rhode Island. Jack McConnell, who provides diversity by virtue of being a plaintiff's trial lawyer and a big high-level plaintiff's trial lawyer.
Yes.
They hated him more than anyone.
I remember that
really,
fight.
really don't want plaintiff's trial lawyers on the bench. So he was a war to get confirmed, but he added enormous professional diversity. And then our latest appointment, which we actually were able to get through the Trump administration, believe it or not, Mary McElroy, is a woman whose family is super active in the Rhode Island labor movement and was our public defender, and moved from the public defender position over to the district court. So that's a pretty good broad array of the community, and every one of them is very highly thought of throughout Rhode Island. And I think that's our goal.
I am not surprised that you think about this so keenly and deeply, and I am encouraged by what I see so far. I was very encouraged with the letter from the White House counsel, and also, I mean, the Biden administration is full of people who have really been involved in the fight over the courts, and I think are very focused on identifying, helping nominate really good people, and then that fight to get them confirmed. I hope that the caucus is talking with you about your approach and sharing best practices and identifying people. One thing that we all saw, I thought the hearing went very well this week for Lisa Monaco and Vanita Gupta, the number 2 and 3 positions in the Department of Justice. But of course, the ire from the other side has been aimed at Vanita Gupta, who is a woman of color, and we saw what happened in the Neera Tanden nomination. Are you concerned about that sort of differential treatment of nominees? And what, if anything, can we do about it from the outside? How can we help support nominees and make sure that we're able to move forward?
Well, I think it's important to start by calling it out when it happens. I mean, if you look at Deb Haaland, who's got a lot of trouble at Interior, if you look at Vanita Gupta, who's having a lot of trouble at Assistant Attorney General, if you look at Ms. Clark, who's coming in as Civil Rights Division, if you look at Neera Tanden, who has been withdrawn from OMB, you see that the fire of the Republican opposition has been at least disproportionately, if not quite exclusively, leveled at women of color. And I think the more that we can draw that pattern out, the more that the Republicans who are imposing that pattern are put on their heels a little bit. You will have noticed from the Gupta-Monaco hearings how members of the committee, like Chairman Grassley, went out of the way to open with their
ranking member Grassley
before they went after Gupta. So they're feeling a little bit of pressure about that, and we should make sure they feel more, because obviously there is a pattern.
I really agree with you, and I thought the Democrats from Chairman Durbin on down the road did a really good job of highlighting that and offering their kind of support. And it's a really hard thing to do in the context of that hearing. And these are two, Senator Feinstein pointed out, these were two extraordinarily qualified women up for these positions. And I am hopeful they move forward. And also, Kristen Clark is so extraordinarily qualified to be head of the Civil Rights Division. She is So I wanted to turn to your plans for the subcommittee, because you had your first hearing yesterday. I loved watching it. And it was really well attended, as we mentioned from the other side. There's an appetite to take this on. So I want to give you a chance to talk about sort of your frameworks and what you want to see, because I thought this was a good hearing to sort of set the framework for your subcommittee, right? To say, so these are the things we're going to be looking at going forward. Give us a little bit of a sense of what your focus is here.
What I want to do is to draw and explain the elephant. You know the story about the blind people. One holds the trunk and says, "Oh, this is a snake," and the other holds a leg and says, "Oh, it's a tree trunk," and the other puts his hand on the side and says, "Oh, it's a wall," and the other holds the tail and says, "Oh, it's a fly whisk," or whatever the story is. And it's only when you put the whole story together that you see, it's an elephant. Now I understand. Right. And then every time you see the elephant, you see the connection to the elephant. And we have not done a good job about showing people the elephant. So back to Vanita Gupta, for instance. Why do you suppose they would be so opposed to her? Facially, one could say, well, it's because she's a woman of color and they don't like that. It, revs their constituents' motors, and so they play along. But more to the point, she was head of the Civil Rights Division. As Assistant Attorney General, she's going to oversee the Civil Rights Division directly under her responsibility. And the last thing that they want is a credible Department of Justice Civil Rights Division that will go out and enforce voting rights. So it isn't too many dots to connect what they're doing on voter suppression, which is the #1 task of the Republican Party right now, to what they're doing with Vanita Gupta and with Kristen Clark in the hearings.
That's right.
And if you look at the dark money network that has been packing the courts that we started talking about,
Yeah.
well, when Biden comes on, they're not going to be able to pack the courts any longer. They've lost their turnstile.
That's right.
At the Judicial Selection Office. So what do you do with what the Washington Post said is a $250 million dark money operation?
You turn it to vote suppression.
Voter suppression.
Right.
So Leonard Leo jumps out of his operation hosted by the Federalist Society and goes to the Honest Elections Project. And Harry Severino, who was running the ads for against Garland and for Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Barrett, she's now taken her machinery and she's training her fire on Vanita Gupta. Those were JCN paid ads.
It's the same.
And if all you're seeing is just the ads and you're not seeing the connections and how this all comes from Command Central, then we have a so my job is to try to highlight Republican Command Central and make sure that everybody on our side understands that this is not a policy difference and this is not personal disregard. This is a plan. This is a strategy. This is a scheme, and to try to highlight all of the elements of the scheme.
It is you weave together two things so well right there, and I just want to call attention to it, which is the sort of hinge of Leonard Leo of Republican court packing, and now to pushing for this wave of vote suppression laws, 250 proposed laws in 43 states. Iowa
and forget the laws, just the lawsuits they're going to bring. Honest Elections Project is a big litigator to get cases in front of the judges that he put on.
Well, that's the other part of your story, right? That it doesn't end with the nomination and confirmation. It's also the people bringing the lawsuits and funding the.
You put all that investment into getting the judges on the court. Now you need payday.
So I sort of look at the root cause of this, and you talked about motive a little when we started, and I want to sort of bring that back because so when this is obviously a famous story now, right? That President Obama nominated now Attorney General Merrick Garland, finally got his hearing, finally confirmed in 2016, and the Republicans blocked him for a year to hold the seat open. This was Republicans representing about 40% of the country's population, and then of course they reversed course. And after millions of Americans are voting weeks before, during the 2020 election, they confirmed Justice Barrett. And the result is a 6-3 Trump supermajority. What were they buying with this? Like, what is the, you talked about motive. I mean, what is the upshot of that? Why do we care?
They were buying a court that will rule reliably in favor of their big donor interests. I did a report several years back that highlighted 72 Supreme Court decisions that had all these characteristics. The decision was decided very narrowly. It was only 5-4. It was a hair's breadth decision.
Right.
The 5-4 majority was all Republicans. It was not a mixed 5-4. It was a partisan 5-4 bare majority. And there was a significant, obvious, identifiable Republican donor interest at stake in the case. And there were 72 of them, which is a lot of cases when you look at the size of the Supreme Court's annual docket.
That's right.
And every single one, 72-0, was won by the big Republican donor interest. So when you've got a machine like that you can crank, and you've got judges who you've screened for their pro-corporate, pro-right-wing bias onto the court, it then becomes a machine for getting policies in place that you can't win through the legislature. And that's what they have done.
So you put out this series of court capture reports last year with the DPCC, and they highlighted sort of the details. They sort of told the story you also, by the way, told at the Amy Coney Barrett hearing. I think of it as your inconvenient truth moment of, Al Gore, you had the poster sort of showing the connection, sort of showing us the picture of the elephant. And it was interesting to me because we had worked with you and knew about the court capture reports and had sort of, helped, figure out, talk to people about the reports. But I started getting all these emails from people saying, are you watching Sheldon Whitehouse? Are you seeing this? And what hit home was how few people actually know about this.
Yeah,
that this was
we've
new.
done a terrible job of telling this story.
But the I'm thinking through one of those reports is about democracy, right? The impact on democracy. So among those 5 to 4 decisions, and we could list all 72, but Citizens United, opening up the flood of corporate money.
Yeah.
Obviously, partisan gerrymandering, defanging unions, and of course, in my view, Shelby County.
To me, the worst of those were Citizens and Shelby.
Yeah.
And they were the worst, not just because of their effect, but because in order to get to the decision that they wanted to render, the 5 Republicans had to posit a factual predicate that their decision completely stood on. In the case of Citizens United, it was, this spending is going to be transparent. Everybody's going to know that we're ExxonMobil and we paid for this ad.
Right.
And in Shelby County, it was, racism is over. These pre-clearance states are never going to go out and do surgically precise attacks on minority voters. Those days are past.
Right.
Well, neither of those is a legal conclusion. The court has no expertise or jurisdiction to make those decisions, and they were flatly factually wrong. And here's where I think the really telling thing is about the nature of this court that we have right now. For Citizens United, for the following decade, the court saw on the front page of every newspaper how wrong they had been. There was simply no doubt. We're over $1 billion in non-transparent political spending. They know the predicate upon which they stood their decision was wrong, indisputably. Right. Their own federal courts were describing, after Shelby County, legislative acts targeting minority voters with, quote, surgical precision. They were reading those cases. They were seeing those appeals come up. And the fact that they never went to reconsider the legal premise that stood on a factual premise, once the false factual premise was conclusively disproven in plain view, that's where I start to doubt the goodwill and the motive of the court.
Well, I think about it this way, Senator, and I suspect you agree with me, but I'll ask it anyway. When I worked on the committee and I worked on the nomination of Chief Justice Roberts, and one of the things in Chief Justice Roberts' record, and I was the junior lawyer, I read everything he had done in the Reagan administration, he was always against the Voting Rights Act. At the same time, I worked a year later on the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act in 2006, which was unanimously passed after 20 hearings, 40,000 pages of fact-finding by Congress, which is able to find facts, which said we still need Section 5. It's still necessary. It's working. Yeah. Justice Ginsburg later used her famous umbrella analogy. And
which Shelby County not only ignored in favor of no judicial record on the same subject, but which Scalia turned against Congress as being, if they all agree there's such a bunch of crooks and knaves over there, that this is obviously an exercise in incumbent protection, and we don't have to believe the body across the street.
Because it was a 98 to nothing vote in the Senate, which my then boss, Senator Leahy, pointed out. Senator Justice Scalia had been confirmed 100 to nothing. So what did that say about his confirmation? But but my takeaway from this was actually something more jarring for me, which is you had Congress acting at the height of its authority under the 15th Amendment. You have fact finding at a serious level, 20 hearings. You have a unanimous vote. And then the Supreme Court, 5 justices, Chief Justice Roberts said, doesn't matter. And you know what won? The court won. The
judicial meh.
The judicial meh. So so I'm going to ask you a tough question about how do we fight back. If the court is doing this much to misshape our democracy, and I know many advocates are focusing on this, do we need to look at expanding the size of the Supreme Court to be able to get a court that will fairly judge these kind of democracy questions? Isn't that incumbent upon us to think about? I know I'd love your thoughts on sort of where you're.
So here's where we go wrong as Democrats. We see a problem and we think to ourselves, what would be a good solution for that problem? Mm-hmm. I know, let's add seats to the court and add new judges and dilute the packed right-wing cadre that is on the court right now. Mm-hmm. which is all fine, except for the fact that we're in a democracy and there's a public out there. And we haven't convinced the public yet. We haven't done our homework of making the case. We haven't shown them the elephant. It's a little bit like walking into a courtroom as a lawyer and saying, Your Honor, I demand extraordinary relief for my client, and I demand it right now. If the judge and the public are equivalents, what the judge is going to say is, fine, counselor, make your case. Show me why you deserve it. And we don't get to jump that hoop, I don't believe. We've got to go and show the American public what has happened here and why reforms are needed. And that's what I'm trying to get at in my subcommittee hearings. That's why we need to show the elephant, because you don't get extraordinary relief without having made your case and brought the public along with you in a democracy. And but it's on us that we haven't bothered to do that.
So where I gently disagree with you is I think that you've actually made a better case already than maybe you think you have. And I by the way, I keep going back to a phrase you keep talking about, showing the elephant. My mother always says, "How do you eat an elephant?"
One bite at a time.
One bite at a time. So it's a different analogy, but I'm thinking we got a lot of work to do.
We got to take this one bite at a time too.
That's right. So,
yeah, and it's not about the quality of my argument or the quality of my analysis or the quality of my analogy. It's about making sure that the American people have been brought along with us, and we've made that point, and we have to do that as a party. That can't just be a handful of senators who've got a good idea.
I think that you're really onto something, and I wanted to sort of talk about what is the threshold for making that case, because one and this is the danger. I didn't prep this question. I'm just going to ask it off the top of my head, and you can tell me if it was a bad question. But one of the things that struck me is the Democrats and the new Biden administration have just passed the American Rescue Plan, which is an extraordinary popular and bold piece of legislation that addresses the pandemic. It's got 70% support of the American people. And let's assume that law or other popular laws that you pass, maybe it's to address climate change in the infrastructure bill, or protect LGBTQ Americans, or pathway decision for immigrants. Ultimately, it's going to hit the buzzsaw of these courts. What if the court takes out that back? Is that something where, it's a similar argument to how do you think about doing away with the legislative filibuster to do big, bold things? It's the American people really care, I think, about, is this helping me or not? Is this hurting me or not? At some point, is there a threshold for you that you're looking at, or is it if you pass HR 1 and sort of address these ethics problems and transparency, and then the court then takes a whack at that?
I think it's a little bit kind of an all of the above and see how far you get.
Yeah.
I would single out one thing coming up, and that is that President Biden promised that he would put together a courts commission.
That's right.
And as far as I know right now, the chair and co-chair have been identified, but nobody else has. And the process and timing for commission activities and the formal investiture of the commission have not been settled on yet. So I don't know quite when that's going to light up. He's had a busy 50 days when you consider that he started late, had an insurrection in the Capitol, didn't get his, we didn't even get our majority on time, thanks to Mitch fiddling around with the organizing resolution. So it's, I don't want to fault Joe Biden and his team for not having gotten this off the ground yet in this early part. But when they do get it off the ground, this is a big opportunity to educate the public about the elephant and about the dark money interests that are behind all this scheming and about how much got broken. They could do a really, really telling job that could really help educate the American people, or they could basically be a kind of, officer friendly,
right.
Things need to improve. It's important to have bipartisanship, yada, yada, kind of soft soap. Like,
that's right.
Unfortunately, we saw a lot of in the previous administration.
Well, I think you're onto something with the sort of the agenda of your subcommittee and trying to tell this story. And I really, maybe I'm just not that bright, but it really didn't strike me this way until today, and to watching your hearing yesterday, how the corporate court capture side and the subversion of democracy side of this minority control of the court is really two sides of the same fight.
Yeah,
it's two sides of the same coin.
It's the same apparatus.
Yeah, and
Trump's lawyers had the audacity to talk about a Kraken
Oh
really
yeah.
cracking out there. This is it with all its tentacles, and it's a creepy apparatus to be up against. But as you said at the very beginning, when you poke it, it screams and gets very uncomfortable and fights and bites back. And that's usually a very good sign that you're in a really good place.
Well, I'm gonna shout out to all the advocates who are watching us today to pay attention to the subcommittee and how it makes the case, and to help make the case and shine a light on this, because I think you're right. This is something where whatever the remedy is, and by the way, I should have mentioned this, and you might have mentioned it. The remainder of the Voting Rights Act, right, Section 2, is very much in peril in the court right now.
Yeah.
And of course, across the set of other rights, the right to an abortion, protections against discrimination for LGBTQ Americans. These things, I think, is this something you'll also be focused on in your committee, as I hope they don't come down, but as bad decisions come down on the court, from the court, is that something you'll sort of weave into the story you tell?
Well, yes, because the judicial court capture apparatus has moved over to voter suppression. Leo moved from the Federal Society court packing scheme to the Honest Elections Project voter suppression scheme. Carrie Severino moved her dark money funded advertising guns from targeting voters to push for confirmation of Barrett and Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, to now swiveling the guns and targeting Vanita Gupta and Kristen Clark, because she wants to dirty up the people who are going to be running the voting rights enforcement for the Department of Justice. Same people, same money, same machinery, change the targeting.
So we're going to open this up. We're going to start asking some questions from the audience, if that's okay, Senator. And I will encourage the people watching to if you're watching on the YouTube channel, there's a Q&A, a chat box, and if you put those questions in the chat box, our moderator will get to them, and if they're good enough, we'll ask them. So please, we get to decide. It's great. It's a great power. And Senator, you're going to really love chairing this committee, because you also get to make a lot of the decisions about what gets asked. So here's the first question. Have you thought about doing a book on this, on the court capture?
You mean like Captured, the book I did on this?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. There's the smile. So tell us about your book.
So the book looks at the apparatus, if you will, of corporate infiltration into American democracy. And it looks at the capture of the courts, going back to the Powell memo and the apparatus that got set up. It also looks at the way in which corporate efforts have intruded into the administrative world. And administrative agency capture has now become a standard feature of both economics and administrative law as a result of the prevalence of all of that. And we focus a bit on the ultimate capture operation, which is the fossil fuel climate denial, dark money operation, and how the role of corporations in American politics is completely out of kilter with what the founding fathers had in mind. And indeed, it was Justice Powell, author of the famous Powell memo for the Chamber of Commerce, who then went on to the Supreme Court without having disclosed that he wrote the Powell memo, and ended up writing the Massachusetts bank decision, Bellotti versus First National Bank, I think it was called, that first said, nope, corporations have an absolute right to spend money in politics. And after that, it's been just off to the races.
Your book is a reminder. When I was reading it and actually reading the reports, that there's this entire apparatus also of sort of legal terminology and ideology built around what's just a results-driven agenda. And I think of every Republican nominee that I ever saw come before the committee, including Chief Justice Roberts, talk about being judicial modesty and not judicial activism. And then I look at the Shelby County decision, appalling act of judicial activism. What do you think? Are we missing the language? Is it, or are we
no,
just,
they're playing dress up and we're not calling them out on it.
Well, I hear you. So we got another question here, which is, what do you think are currently the most important open federal judicial seats right now? What should the Biden administration prioritize filling? This is like the quiz portion. Are you paying attention to vacancies?
Clearly, it's the seats on the circuit courts of appeal. Those are a huge priority. We'll see what Justice Breyer decides to do. If he steps down, obviously the Supreme Court seat becomes the immediate and highest priority. And obviously every possible avenue of leverage, power, and mischief that Mitch McConnell can get up to, he will deploy to try to interrupt that. But it's the circuit courts of appeal that matter. For the district courts, they don't care that much. If they've got a real nutty ideologue who they want to put on the bench just to have him be like ready to be called up to the majors on a circuit court later on, they might stuff him into a district court someplace, to be kind of player to be named later.
That's
but
right.
It's the circuit courts that they care about, because that's where policy gets made, and that's where the control makes such a difference.
So I'll call out one particular circuit court with the confirmation of Judge Garland now to be Attorney General Garland. There are now 2 vacancies on the DC circuit, which is obviously has a unique
circuit oversees Washington D.C. and its regulatory agencies, where so much of the interest of the groups that are behind this whole operation is concentrated. They care deeply about the DC circuit. That's why Harry Reid had to do the nuclear option, because it was the DC circuit they wouldn't let us confirm anybody to. So yeah, the DC circuit is their priority, and we need to pay attention to that.
Well, and there are, there's some news reports, and we don't have the names, but potentially Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson being talked about, and I think there are other strong candidates. The opportunity for change is there. Is that something that's going to be a focus for you, right? And the Democrats. That's going to have to be a big lift for the reasons you said. The forces are going to be arrayed against you. And in a 50-50 Senate, are you finding opportunities to work together and across the aisle? And is there any way for that to translate to the fight over the courts? Or is that? I fear the answer watching the treatment of Vanita Gupta's nomination and how do we move forward?
It's hard to tell. Garland got, I think, 70 votes, which means 20 Republicans voted with him, and what that leaves 29 against. So they're not. It's not an entire blockade, and particularly if they know it's not going to work, what's the point? But I don't want to say yet, but I'm suspicious that we were able to get a fair amount of legislative work done in bipartisan fashion under Trump, because he was such a noxious thing that Republicans were, willing to work with us on stuff. It had to be fairly low profile. It couldn't be a big thing. It couldn't be something that Trump would criticize. But within that, I got a lot of bipartisan bills passed in the Trump era. I had my most successful legislative years in the Trump era. And I've got a feeling that Mitch really didn't mind that, but now he's going to be a general objector to bipartisanship, because that was the anti-Obama playbook. It worked, so he'll try it again.
Is there a possibility, at least in sort of ethics reform, that feels like I know you've got some bipartisan buy-in there, and you've worked across the aisle to focus on those issues. Is that going to be harder? It's going to be
really hard. It's going to be really hard. A lot of it has to do with, voting rights. And now that the Republican Party has chosen voter suppression as its top political priority, it's going to be very hard for them to not, coalesce around that. It's astonishing to watch how the Republican Party can take a really serious punch in the face and then instantly regroup itself. It's a little bit like that guy who looked like he was made out of mercury in the movie. What was this? Or was Schwarzenegger playing the guy who came from the future to save the little boy?
Oh, the Terminator. Yeah, the T-1000. Yes.
Remember the guy, like fire a rocket into him and he got blown all over the floor, and then the pieces would coalesce and back you go. He needs to get through the fence. He walks right through it. He coalesces and back you go. The Republican Party in the Senate coalesces like that. Yeah,
that year. I knew that my day would end up with me talking about the Terminator T2 with you, and honestly, it's one of my favorite movies, one of my father's favorite movies. So I'm actually feeling emotional about it. But that's as good of I'm hoping that we get enough pull here that there could be some memes, some T-1000 memes about the Republican, and it is astonishing.
After 1-6, they were all over the place, and now they're like unified. That nothing to see here, folks. Let's move on.
It is alarming, and we didn't talk about, and I'm sorry that we didn't, about the really horrific aftermath of the insurrection and how terrifying that day and time was. but I feel like it's equally terrible that it's just sort of instantly being gaslighted and let's turn our back, and bipartisanship being used as a cudgel instead of any kind of honest appraisal of what role did we play in this, on the Republican side. And I don't know if that's how you feel about being where you are at this time.
It's a little bit sickening, to tell you the truth. I like to work with my colleagues and understand they have different political pressures, and you've got to give your colleagues a little bit of space to operate within the political pressures in which they exist. But at some point, it just gets to be really a little bit sickening.
Well, I think I can't imagine. I felt for you that day and for the staff that day and in the aftermath. And I was so moved by the impeachment proceedings as well, that just everybody sitting and listening to this, that this happened, right? That felt important to me. And maybe that's also what you're trying to do, right? With your committee, saying this is what's happening. Like, we just need to say it.
And, we're here about judges and courts. Who knows? Maybe there's a way for judges and courts to get a look at this in a way where you don't have a fixed jury that's been tampered with, and you actually have witnesses and real evidence, and what lawyers say in the courtroom can be held against them if it's untruthful. So in a different arena, you might get a whole better look at all of that. Well, I'm hopeful that you remember their lies about the DNC kid who got murdered by Hillary Clinton.
They ruined.
The family got big judgments against the people who spread that. The lies about Sandy Hook having been a staged effort. The parents got big judgments against all of that. Now you see Dominion, the company that's been accused of cooking the election, filing like billion-dollar lawsuits against Rudy Giuliani and the sleazy lawyers that accused it. You get to that judicial forum and suddenly life gets a lot more interesting than when you're sitting in a cooked Senate.
So I've just got a couple more questions, if that's okay, Senator. I know we're running on your time. I'm going to ask a question from my dad, Zach Paris. And I mentioned T1000 and it came up, Senator. And so he has said, and he teaches a course in constitutional law and history to college students locally here. Says, you have discussed the politically sensitive issue of expanding the Supreme Court. Can you discuss your views on eliminating the filibuster for legislation? I know that wasn't the topic today.
It's an important thing, because if we're going to get to a lot of these reforms, we're going to have to work our way around the Republican filibuster. And this has a couple of angles. Angle one is what we have now is not a filibuster. What we have now is a right by the minority to stop legislation unless the majority can get to 60 votes, period, end of story. It has nothing to do with getting on the floor and filibustering. This is not Mr. Smith goes to Washington.
That's right.
So, we got to remember that. And there's a case to be made that if we went back to that, we might actually do better, because you can ultimately exhaust the other side or put them in the position of having to stand up on the floor and defend the indefensible and lose their credit with the American people when they do that. And so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is that it's hard to decide that you're going to go and undo the filibuster in any way in a vacuum.
Right.
I think it's going to be important to put up some bills that they then filibuster so that we're proving the case to the American people. Back to my business of, hard to ask for extraordinary relief from a court till you put in your case. We've got to do our homework of showing them filibustering some important stuff, which both might move the American public that wants those bills, and it might move some of our colleagues if they can come around to say, I was against changing the filibuster, but this bad faith filibustering for the sake of obstruction, this is not what I had in mind. Let's see what we can do, and then you start working on what a reform might look like.
And you can correct me if I'm overreading you on this. Is that sort of your same formulation on court expansion? If you make the case and we run into obstruction and things are happening,
there's nothing that holds us back under the Constitution from doing it, but it really is important in a democracy to make your case and not just assume because we're senators and we've been close to this, we're so wonderful and we're so right that we don't need to do the homework of making our case and bringing the public along. Because when we don't fill that gap with that homework, the Republicans fill it with their counter messaging and they tear us to pieces.
So my last question, and I'm sort of aggregating some of the questions I'm seeing in the comments. One of the things when we do these panels, Senator, we don't like to just gaze at a problem, right? We like to think about solutions. How do we get people lifted up? And you have done a really wonderful job today of saying, this is what I'm doing in my with my gavel and my committee and with my role as a senator. What do you advise people out there to do, whether they're lawyers or advocates or activists? There has been this, and we've talked about this over the years, there's been an asymmetry, right? The right has this apparatus on the left. We're building that and we're focused. What should we be doing differently? What do you want to see as a senator? What helps you do your job even more effectively?
Tell the story. Every one of us has a homepage newspaper that is always looking for op-eds. Every one of us who is a lawyer has a home state bar journal or a home county bar journal or a home city bar journal that is always looking for articles. There are plenty of law reviews and other academic publications, and we need to get the message out about what is going on. It could be as simple as an analysis of how a wrong factual predicate should be treated by the Supreme Court, using Citizens United as Shelby as the example.
That's right.
It could be why the court engaged in fact-finding in the first place when appellate courts are never supposed to engage in fact-finding. It could be writing about the dark money problem. It could be writing about how the court has harmed your group, your interest, and how it's not fair. You could write about what happened to the Seventh Amendment. The Republican justices like to say that the Second Amendment is the one that's been overlooked, and then they go out and smash the Seventh Amendment to pieces, the right to a jury trial, in case after case after case after case in which they don't even mention the Seventh Amendment. Right. So, when you talk with kids, you sometimes say, use your inside voices. So I think this is a moment when we need to use our outside voices and not just talk to each other any longer, but start making the case. And I think it matters to the court when this case is being made in bar journals, when it's being made in law review articles, when they're hearing it in the circle of legal commentary around them. You can do a lot, I think, if you can put your voice out there. We actually have a website that I can get to you that you can send to everybody who's participated that has a whole bunch of the raw materials, the like basic research, the case citations, the language that works, all that kind of stuff, teed up for people who want to do this in a whole variety of ways. But we've been quiet about this for far too long. And by the way, lawyers, despite the fact that we live off of our mouths, we really suck at communicating as a group.
It's politics, really. I mean, this is what politics is about: making your voice heard and pushing and yeah. By the way, my 6-year-old does not always use his inside voice. He's an incredibly effective advocate, I've already found. So I'm gonna send him at you your way. But look, that's a call to action, and you have made that call before. That we need to take this seriously, to take this problem of court capture seriously. We have an opportunity ahead of us with hopefully a conveyor belt of nominations, but they're not going to confirm themselves on their own. And they need to be diverse. They need to be progressive. And they need not just you, Senator Whitehouse, but people out there, I think backing you up. So I'm about to wrap us up. I didn't know if you had any last word for us before I let you go. I fear that we've intruded on your time too much today.
Yeah, no. This has been great, and I appreciate it. And I want to thank you and Robert and everybody who's on the call for all your commitment to all of this. You wouldn't be here on this call if you weren't committed to getting this done. And I think we just need to, bring this question of showing everybody the elephant into focus and connecting the dots so that the public begins to understand what's going on here. Because if we can, trial lawyers know that to swing the jury your way and get them to understand the evidence, you have to create a narrative and a story that is true and that is compelling, that has a good guy and a bad guy, a evildoer and a victim. And the skills of how you do that are very common in our profession. We have not brought those storytelling skills to bear on the story that is right in front of us, that we understand better than anybody else because we live with it and we see it. And we've got to make that our cause and trust that if we can tell this story truthfully and well, it will bring the American public along with us in a way that gives us a chance to cure the harm.
Well, Senator, you've done quite a good job today of advancing that story to our audience. And with our audience, I will point out that we have put the website in the chat that you mentioned, medium.com/@Senator Whitehouse. So you can go and look for tools to get involved.
Makes the research easier.
Yeah. You don't even have to do your own research, people. He's done it for you.
That is a research resource.
Yeah.
Look at the 80 decisions and, pick out the ones that you particularly are offended by and can, talk about them, whatever you want to do, but use your outside voices.
And here at the Raben Group, we're this proficient. We are actually popping that on as a chyron. Take it out.
Look at it coming across on the chyron.
I know you like going on MSNBC.
Way to go.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Senator Whitehouse, for being with us today, for being a champion on the courts. This has been Shaping a Progressive Federal Judiciary. I am Jeremy Paris of the Raben Group and Committee for a Fair Judiciary. I hope that you will all stay involved. I hope that you will all pay attention to the Senator Whitehouse's Subcommittee on the Federal Courts as they continue to tell this story. And I hope that everybody has a wonderful rest of your day and week. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you, Jeremy.